to the Action Podcast. Here's your host, my dad.
Well, and just like that, here we are at 61 episodes. I can't believe it. We have just a couple more episodes before this season will be wrapping up, which is just mind-blowing. Today I got to spend some time with somebody I really enjoy and respect. He is a man of faith and a mentor to many. Over the past year, he and I have been able to spend quite a bit of time together, and I will be forever grateful for his friendship. He's had a very successful career and even sits on the board of Emerge. Today, he's going to be sharing about how to leave a legacy. Welcome to the program, Leigh Gerstenberger.
I'm a Christ follower, I'm a husband, I'm a father, a grandfather, and I happen to have spent the last 10 years of my working career in Akron, Ohio, in the financial services business, and that's how I got involved with Emerge.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit about your connection with Emerge?
Sure. As I mentioned, I moved to Akron, Ohio, or actually Hudson, just north of Akron, in 2007. I thought I was moving there for a job. Turns out I was there for the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And I started hearing about Emerge Ministries, Emerge Counseling, through actually, I think, some contacts at my church. And then over the next couple of years, I would learn a little bit more about Emerge. And I finally met a gentleman who was the CEO at the time. And we developed a great friendship. And he asked me to come on the Emerge board. So I've probably been on the board since 2009, 2010. So probably 8, 9, 10 years on the Emerge board. Mm-hmm. And it's a great organization. I love the mission. I love what Emerge does. And I've seen the impact it's had in my life, my family's life, and a lot of people I know. And so that's my connection with Emerge.
And the cool thing about that, it's kind of reconnected you and I. You know my dad and my family, right? And we grew up going to the same church. And I've been very blessed over this last year in a new role that I have taken on at Emerge, that just about twice a month, you and I spend about a half hour to an hour together. And we talk about Emerge and where we're going. And you've been so gracious with helping me connect with other people and really mentoring me. So before we get into what we're talking about, I want to let our audience know how appreciative I am of you and the time that you've invested in me, and probably a lot of other guys like myself. And you've just been a really great person to look up to. And I just really appreciate you.
Well, thanks, Matt. I've enjoyed watching Emerge evolve with the leadership with you and a couple of the other folks that Dr. Crosby's brought in. So happy to be able to help any way I can.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about, and this is a talk that you've given before, and we're kind of pulling out some sections about legacy. Would you mind talking a little bit about what legacy means? If our audience is listening and they're kind of going, I don't even know, where to begin with that, or what does that word really mean? What are your thoughts around that word and kind of what you were trying to portray in your talk?
Well, I guess it goes back to last summer, a year ago. I went to my 50th high school reunion. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in South Hills of Pittsburgh, so I'm a native of Western Pennsylvania. And there were about 700 students in my high school graduating class. And, when they get ready to plan the reunion, there's a lot of information that's shared. And I was surprised to learn that over 10% of my class had passed away. Mm-hmm. So there's 70, 80 people from my high school graduating class that are no longer living. And that really got me thinking about, time's short, for all of us. I mean, any one of us, every breath's a gift. But it really got me thinking about legacy and what I want to be remembered for. And I think about this off and on. And I jokingly say to folks, my wife and kids give me a hard time because whenever I'm faced with a difficult problem, one of my phrases is, let's start at the end and work backwards. Mm. And so as it relates to the subject of legacy, it occurred to me a while ago, what do I want my tombstone to say? What do I want on my rock? And I came up with 4 words. He made a difference. Mm. And so if that's what I want my legacy to be, if you work backwards, okay, what are you doing each day to try to make a little bit of a difference in somebody's life? And so that's sort of the impetus of where this came from. There's a lot more to it, which we'll get into, but that's maybe the jumping off point.
So I think that's a great concept, is to work backwards. And so when you're doing that and you're thinking about legacy, and then you kind of go to what's written on one's tombstone, how does then one put those things into practice? And what are some of the things that you start thinking about to, as you don't want to waste a minute, as we know, with every breath, we're getting closer to that. What are some of your thoughts around that to someone who's listening?
Well, I broke it down into 4 areas, and then I recently added a 5th. But I think the key to first of all, I think there's 2 choices when it comes to legacy. We can either just live our lives capriciously and just let stuff happen, or we can live our lives intentionally. Either one is a choice. So if you just decide, I'm not going to worry about my legacy, that's a choice you've made, and the chips fall where they may, so to speak. Or you could say, yeah, I want to be a little intentional, and I want to try to make a difference in people's lives if that's my legacy, and so you work towards that. And so the other thing I would share is I'm in a number of men's groups, and they're book studies or Bible studies or fellowship kind of things, but we get together for an hour, and at the last 15 to 20 minutes, we do what's called a check-in. And we go around the table, or the Zoom screen, as it were, and we just ask, hey, how you doing in a couple of key areas in your life? Your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, your emotional health. And then the 5th one that I've just added is how you doing with relationships? And some guys will share, hey, I'm sick, or I've go to the doctor for this, or I got a struggle in my marriage, or my quiet time's lousy, or work's not really going that great. But there's 4 or 5 key areas, and that's where we're making an impression every day. And some of them are more internal, like our emotional health and our mental health. I mean, we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be much good to anybody else. That's right. And then some of them are on the relational front, the people you work with, your family members, relationships you have with people. So those are sort of the general areas that I sort of think of when I think of legacy. But I start by telling people you got to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, whether it's physically or emotionally or mentally, you're not going to be much good to anybody else, and that's going to impact your legacy.
Yeah, I feel like over the past year, and you and I've talked about this a little bit, is I've spoke to so many pastors. I feel like over the last year, I've been speaking on burnout. It's speaking about how I think sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves because we're trying to take care of so many other people. And I always use the kind of alliteration that, when you're on an airplane and the flight attendant says, when the oxygen mask comes down, put that on yourself before you take care of anybody else, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to help anybody else. I think that's a really good point to be reminded of, because I think a lot of people burn at both ends too often.
Well, yeah, and then to compound that, we have had the pandemic.
Sure.
And that's created, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that's created a whole different level of stress for people and anxiety. And this sort of came to my attention in a couple different ways. I have 9 adults in my family. My wife and I, my mother, I got grown kids that are married, and I've got a sibling. And I would say we're a normal, healthy family. But of those 9 people over the last 2 years, 7 of them have been getting counseling. Wow. And if the 7 of 9 adults in my family have had the need for some sort of counseling, it could have just been a couple sessions, or it could have been months long, and we had, that tells me, if I think I'm from a normal family, that the stress level, the anxiety level, the need for taking care of one's mental health is significant. I was talking to a friend the other day that's struggling with some anxiety, depression issues. He went to his doctor, and the doctor said, his PCP said 35% of the patients he sees, he's treating for the initial stages of anxiety, depression, make a prescription, get to a psychologist, exercise more, so it's really it's an epidemic in our society. There's a mental health crisis, I think, in our society today.
Yeah. Can you go over those 5 points one more time so our audience can hear again those 5 points that you were just discussing that you said need to be addressed?
Physical,
Yep.
mental, spiritual, emotional, relational.
Yeah. Can you just share? We talked a little bit about taking care of yourself, but what are some in those other areas, things that you do to address those areas practically? So if somebody's listening, they can go, I haven't really thought about legacy, and these are areas that are being brought to my attention. What are some things that you would share that maybe you've done in those areas?
Yeah, well, the big one on the physical side, and again, this is a podcast, so we're just getting the audio. But when I 'married in 1977, I was 6'3". I weighed 180 pounds. 40 years later, I was 6'3" and weighed over 300 pounds. And after 40 years of trying to lose weight and keep it off by diet and exercise and not working, I got to the point where, I started to have a couple of grandkids. I'd get down on the floor and I couldn't get up. I couldn't get up. I struggled to get up.
Sure.
If I was playing golf and I was walking up an elevated green, I'd be out of breath just walking up to the green. Or if I had to go up a flight of steps at work because the elevator was out or there was no elevator, I'd be winded. And so I ended up looking into weight loss surgery. And in 2016, I want to say, I had a gastric bypass. And the end result is I got down to 199 pounds. Now I've gained a few of that back, but I'm, 225, 230. So I'm still 75 pounds lighter than I was when I was 60. I feel a lot better. I got a lot more energy. I was pre-diabetic. I was pre-hypertensive. I had sleep apnea. I had all the symptoms of somebody that was morbidly obese. And now I'm down on the floor with my grandkids, and I can still have a little trouble getting up, but it's more because of my arthritis, not because of my weight. So, there's an example of something I did that people, I even thought it was a pretty extreme procedure, but, Lord willing, I'll be around for a few more years. My mother's just turned 95. And if I live as long as she lives, I could have 25% of my life ahead of me still. Yeah. So, we'll see how it goes.
And so talk to me a little bit about how that plays into legacy and why that's so important. Because I hear what you're saying, and I recognize why that's so important.
So I have 6 grandchildren, and our situation is rather unique in that they all live within 2 or 3 doors of me. So I see my grandchildren multiple times a week. And, I grew up, I didn't really know. I knew my grandparents. They lived in New Jersey. I lived in Pennsylvania. I saw them once or twice a year. I have certain kind of memories, but my grandkids are going to have different kind of memories of me and my wife, their grandmother, because of the close proximity. If I'm not here, they're going to have different kind of memories. Like I have different kind of memories of my grandparents, but these kids are in our lives daily. My grandmother, my oldest granddaughter comes over every morning, makes her breakfast here, and then we walk her to the bus stop. And she's 9. We've been doing that for a couple of years, and
that's good.
Lord willing, we'll be doing it for a lot more. And that's going to have a different kind of impact on her than my grandmothers had on me, because I saw them for a week or two every summer and maybe at Christmas, for the first 15, 18 years of my life when they were still around. But I had, it was great when we were together, but it was not a lot of quantity of time. We've got quantity and quality time with our grandkids because of we're co-located with them, but we got to be healthy to be here. when they show up for make their breakfast or make their lunch, and you walk to the bus.
Yeah, I feel like this past year, the Lord just placed such a thing on my heart around my physical well-being. I think I shared with you, I got really sick with COVID, and it just made me really think about my health, because I've got a 4-year-old and a 5-month-old, and I'm 45 years old. So, I mean, I've got to figure some things out to make sure I'm around a long time for my kids. And I think that's so important. You said something else earlier I wanted to touch back on, and is the importance of our relationships. And I think that was one of the fifth areas. And talk to me about being in relationship with others. And I think this is a huge area you've been helping me with and connecting with others, but talk to me about that.
Well, a couple of things come to mind, Matt. And I like to tell stories. So here's a cute story. So I retired from the bank in Akron. We moved back to Pittsburgh because this is where the kids, the grandkids, and our elderly parents are. And my wife says, hey, we can go to the Second Act group that meets at our church. Second Act is the group of retirees from our big church here in Pittsburgh. They get together every week for a service project, a lecture. They drink coffee, they eat donuts. It's fellowship. It's great. So we go to Second Act, and we knew a lot of the people there because we've been to that church off and on for the last 30 years. We heard a great speaker. We had a nice lunch. We stuffed envelopes for the upcoming Christmas, services to send out all the flyers. And we left, and my wife said, wasn't that great? I said, yeah, it was wonderful, but I'm not going back. Mm-hmm. And she said, what do you mean you're not going back? I said, I love those people, but I want to spend my life right now with people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, trying to help, encourage, influence, impact them. There may be a time when I want to drink coffee, eat donuts, listen to a speaker, fellowship, commiserate with people my age or older, but I don't want to do that right now. I want to pour my life back into people who, where I can still make a difference. So that's at a high level, that's my example of relationships. And so believe me, I appreciate you telling me how much you enjoy the time we spend together. But believe me, I get as much, if not more, out of it than you do, because it's fulfilling for me, because I think I'm making it. Oh, there's that word, making a difference. He made a difference. Yeah. One other thing real quick. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago. I heard a speaker named Kevin Brown talk about heroes. And you could look it up. He's written a great book on heroes. He said, heroes are ordinary people who do extraordinary things. But he had this great analogy, or they told the story. He said, so when you look in the mirror, he said, who are the faces you see of the people that have influenced you? Mm-hmm. So, I've got a long list of people. When I look in the mirror and I think about that guy at work, or this guy at church, or this guy in my neighborhood, or I've got a lot of people that have had an impact on me, on my life over the years. Then he says this question: who sees your face in that mirror? Mm-hmm. So you said you see my face in that mirror. That's incredibly honoring to me. But I guess my takeaway from my new friend Kevin Brown is live your life so that when people look in the mirror and they're looking at people who have influenced you, they see your face. They see my face. Yeah. And it's not about me, it's about them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I'm glad that you made that connection of bringing the visual of whose face do you see in the mirror, and then who sees your face. Because that's really it. Not to get too into the weeds with it, but our life is about the time that we have and the experience and relationships we gather. And the more and more, I was actually at church the other night. I was talking with a group of guys, and it's so interesting to me how the world is continuously moving towards separating us, like bringing us apart. The more and more we get into the internet, the more and more we were in a pandemic, the more and more that people are working from home, the world is moving to a place where it's kind of pulling us apart from being in communion with each other. And if the enemy wanted anything, it's certainly that. We were even breaking this down to the point, like I had this like almost epiphany the other night. We've got a 5-month-old who's barely sleeping, and and I was thinking about it. It's like I just wonder how God intended us to, raise children. Like the very best early man was living in a hut. And I was sitting there like awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my wife and it's like, I just wonder how much the enemy had walls in play, because the more walls you have in the house, the more you are separated from each other, where it's like God created us to be more tribe-like.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then I started thinking even more, it's like the more privacy we have, the more we get into our own demons, into our own sin, and the more shame that is brought in. It's interesting. The more and more we move to separation, the farther and farther we get from, I think, what creation was supposed to be. And it was interesting. There was a report came out recently in the middle of the pandemic into now. Homes in the 2000s were being built with open floor plans.
Oh, yeah.
And during the pandemic into now, people are actually closing those open floor plans off because they're needing more privacy to work from home. And it's interesting because it's bringing families who were really kind of connecting and separating them again. So I think community connectivity are just so important to who we are.
Well, and you talk about isolation. We're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but the internet, phones, people are not in relationship like they used to be because we got all this technology. I just came off the golf course and we had a great day. It's 70 degrees here on November the 4th in Pittsburgh, of all places. Yeah. And this one lady said, boy, that's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed being with you. I said, you know what? For me, golf's about people. I mean, I like being able to spend 4 or 5 hours with people and just, I said, if I play well, it's a bonus. Because I didn't play particularly well, but it's a good thing golf's about people for me, because I barely broke 100. But to me, it's relationship, it's fellowship, it's spending time with people.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, you were very generous and took my dad and I probably to the best golf course I've ever been to in my entire life over the summer. And I told you before, that's going to be a memory I'll never forget, playing that course, and what a treat that was. But, things like that I think are really interesting how they connect. That's another reason I love golf. But you said a word that I want to get into a little bit, because I'd never really heard it before we started recording. And it was business tree. I wanted to say business tree. Can you break that word down a little bit?
Yeah. So it's the intersection of business and ministry. So I spell it BIZNISTRY, business tree. And it's funny. I was in Orlando a couple of years ago, and I was talking to a fellow that was with Campus Crusade, and I was asking him about how the fundraising was going, because he was, that's everybody, Young Life, Crusade, Navigators, they all have to raise their own support. And so he was sharing with me that the old model of the $25, $50, $100 a month really is sort of gone by the wayside in a lot of these ministries. And he said what he does is he offers consulting services to a lot of people that had been donors. And so they're actually paying him for consulting in the business area of their life, and that supports his ministry on the college campuses. So it's business tree, the combination of business and ministry. And it turns out, by the way, there's a book on the subject that I think a guy named Charles Proudfoot wrote. He's from the Cincinnati area. So I didn't come up with the word, but for me, that word business tree really explains really what my career has been about, at least the last part of my career. I was very fortunate. I worked for companies, 2 large banks, that let me incorporate my lifestyle into my work, as opposed to fitting, well, maybe I'm not saying it right, allowed me to incorporate my work into my lifestyle. And so, I mean, I got to talk about ministry all the time as a representative of my employer. I didn't beat people over the head with it, but I think a lot of people realized I was a man of faith. And, you have to sort of walk a certain line to not run afoul of HR guidelines. But I was very fortunate to be able to incorporate my faith into my work life for the last 20 years of my career. And so it's even today, while I'm retired from working for other people, I'm not retired. I've got a lot of different projects I work on, and most of them are business tree related. I'll give you 2 examples. You talk about mentoring. I've got a young man I've known most of his life who's a Merrill Lynch financial advisor. And he and I connected at the end of last year. And he shared with me that he's sort of re-exploring his faith after years of ignoring it. And is that something I might be able to help him with? So here I am. Every week I meet for coffee with this young man who's married. He's got a couple of kids, and he's trying to grow his career in the financial services industry, which is something I know about. And I'm coaching and mentoring him and just doing life with him. His father was a good friend of mine, and unfortunately he passed away a few years ago. So maybe I'm a little bit of a father figure for him. Sure. But so here I am. I'm trying to help a guy in the marketplace be better father, better husband, better employee, better colleague, better neighbor, and it's business tree. Here's the other extreme. I met a couple a few years ago that were trying to reopen a trade school outside of Pittsburgh that taught auto and diesel mechanics. And they didn't know anybody in Pittsburgh. So I tried to help them meet people, connect with people. And they're people of faith, and they're doing this because the Lord's put this on their life. And I've been able to make some introductions and got some investments for them and help them find students, help them find employers. But we're doing it not so they can make a lot of money or that I get anything out of it financially. We're doing it for the kingdom to try to make, there's 19 and 20-year-olds in the 6-month program at NVI in Blairsville can graduate and make $50,000, $60,000 a year, with a 6-month certificate on how to work on diesel or gas engines and be the head of the financial head of household of their family or get a good start in life. And so it's a ministry thing in a business environment. So there's 2 examples of what I'm talking about, business tree.
So one thing I know about you, Leigh, is you just seem to know everybody. It's like, is that something you learned, or do you think that it was just a gift of your personality that God has just kind of bestowed upon you, that you're just a connector of people and you've got a Rolodex a mile long? Like, where does that come from, you think?
Well, I started my career in sales. I started my career in the life insurance business. And, if you want to be good in sales, it helps to know people and get referred to other people or try to figure out how to make connections to people. So it's something I enjoy doing. It's one of the few gifts I have. It comes in handy. And it doesn't, I've yet to find anybody who's been offended because I've made an introduction or because I thought 2 people ought to meet. Yeah. So it doesn't get me in trouble very much. No. And, sometimes the introductions, sometimes nothing happens. Yeah. But the other thing is, it's uncanny. I think it's what part of my calling is because, we just had the situation before we started talking. I'm at this conference a few weeks ago. I sit down at a table with a young lady who I don't know. My wife's still getting her breakfast, and this lady's husband is not at the table yet either. So I said to her, "What's your name?" She tells me, and I said, "Where are you from?" She tells me. I said, "What do you do?" She said, "Well, I'm a psychologist." I said, "No kidding." I said, "I'm on the board of Emerge. Have you ever heard of Emerge?" And she said, "No, what's Emerge?" Now, she's in the Assembly of God Church. I said, "Well, Emerge has been around the Assemblies of God for almost 50 years. Yeah. She didn't know anything about it." And so, it's like I didn't plan that. Right. I just sat down at breakfast and to a total stranger, and in a minute or 2, we're talking about Emerge, and now you've had a chance to meet her, and who knows where it goes. But stuff like that is always happening to me.
She and I had
So
a Zoom conversation about an hour before you and I
yeah,
started recording this. I mean, it's so interesting how God has positioned people to connect like that. I want to move into the mental health area, and you talked about, many of your family members and people that you care about have gone to seek counseling. Talk to me a little bit about, because there's a stigma around seeking out help for mental health issues. And even in your talk, you talk about, if somebody had an issue with their arm, they would go get an X-ray. They wouldn't
right.
think twice about it. Talk to me a little bit about that and your thoughts around just some of the stigmas with mental health and your heart and the reason probably why you're so passionate about Emerge.
My wife and I were married probably 14, 15 years, and we realized we were starting to grow apart. And thankfully, before things got out of control, we got to a counselor. And we spent 6, 9 months doing marriage counseling.
Yeah.
And the woman that counseled us, she didn't market herself as a Christian counselor, but I think she probably used a lot of the same techniques that would probably be used at Emerge.
Yeah.
And candidly, it saved our marriage. We'll be married coming up 47 years in January. So I've benefited personally from it, and a lot of my family members have benefited personally. And yeah, so I think particularly in this day and age, people need to realize and just be honest with themselves. Sometimes you can't go it alone. Sometimes you need a second opinion. Sometimes you need a sounding board. Yeah. And so, but if you get hung up on, I'm too strong to need that, or it's a weakness, or I'm embarrassed, you can actually do more harm to yourself than because if you're not getting the help you need. And so that's the analogy about, if you fell and broke your arm, you go get an X-ray and you get your arm set. You wouldn't say, no, I'm going to tough it out and let it heal on its own.
Yeah.
And but we tend to do that with our mental health. But I think I'm hoping, because it's so much more prevalent in society today, or there's so many more diagnosis codes, that people are realizing there's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's just like any other thing you might need care for, whether it's physical health or mental health.
I think I appreciate your transparency and honesty in that. And I've been very open on the podcast about my journey with mental health and what brought me to become a clinician. And I think it's so important as people listen and hear others that we look up to. I mean, you've had a very successful career. You came from a good home, all these things, but yet there were still things to address. We're still broken, fractured people living in a fallen world. And I think, everything that we try to do on this podcast is help people break that stigma of going, you know what, I'm not good enough because this is going on, but that person, has got everything figured out and I'm too ashamed to go seek out help. It's like, we want to break down those barriers that keep people from really kind of getting the help that they need. And I'm so thankful you're willing to share that.
Well, if we got the time, let me just tell you one other story that sort of plays into this.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a wonderful, loving Christian home, middle class, lifestyle. Unfortunately, the week I graduated from high school, my father passed away at age 42 of a heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
And as devastating as that was, our family got through that. And my father's a great guy, but the older I got, and the more I thought about my dad, something hit me a little differently. I remember as a boy, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, my dad would wrestle, he'd tickle me, we'd roughhouse and stuff like that. But I remember at about age 12 or 13, that all stopped. And my father started to treat me more like a man. Matter of fact, he'd go away on business. He'd say, okay, you're the man of the house now. Mm-hmm. And he was raised by a World War I veteran who was not very demonstrative.
Mm-hmm.
And my father, as I got older, also, he was a stoic. He was not very demonstrative. So, I mean, there was no hugging. There was no kissing. There was no outward display of affection. At least this is what I remember now as I'm in my 20s, 30s, 40s. And so I share that with you because we're well, two things. We learn to be parents by the way we're parented, for the most part.
That's right.
So my father was parented by his father, who was a stoic, World War I veteran, didn't show a lot of emotion. I knew my grandfather for a while before he passed away. My dad took on a lot of those qualities. And so here's what I noticed. As I got to be in my 30s and 40s, I was becoming like my father.
Mm-hmm.
I was not demonstrative. And then I realized this is crazy. It's not healthy either to not, to sort of wall off those parts of your feelings. So we're back to the emotional part of our legacy now. And so I had to make a intentional decision to start being more demonstrative. Actually, one of the things that our marriage counselor would say, you sort of have to maybe fake it till you make it a little bit.
Sure.
And so, I mean, I went for years without hugging my mother, kissing my mother, telling my mother I loved her. And then I started to do that again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to hug and kiss my kids. I have a 40-year-old son, and if he walked into my house today, I'd give him a hug and I'd kiss him on the cheek. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to him on the phone and say goodbye, I say, I love you. Yeah. And it sounds like maybe these are little things, but they're significant to me because, I know my father loved me, but I also know he didn't demonstrate it physically. My kids aren't going to ever wonder. My kids are going to know that their father, their grandfather loved them. My mother, I say to my mother, my mother lives with us now. She's 95. Mm. I tell her I love her every night before she goes to bed, and she tells me she loves me. And so
that's good.
Yeah, it's work to work on your relationships. Yeah. And you work on them both verbally as well as physically.
It's so good. I think that's so importantly. And I can't tell you how many times I've had clients doing family counseling on my couch. And it gets to a point where I'm getting the family to communicate their feelings towards each other. And I've had this, I can't even tell you how many times, multiple times, where the dad will say, well, you know how I feel about you. And the kid will be like, but you never say it. But you never say it. You never tell me how you feel. And I think it's so important. The language that we have, I think a lot of times there's unspoken assumptions like, they know how I feel about them, but it's so powerful to be able to show that physically, be verbal with that. That's a really good takeaway.
Well, and I think it goes back to what we started talking about. You have two choices. You can sort of just live your life, let the chips fall where they may, or you can be intentional. And maybe it sounds weird, but if you're going to be intentional, you got to be intentional about physical touch, telling people you love them, kissing them on the cheek. That's an intentional thing.
Yeah. Can I ask you one more question before we wrap?
Sure.
I'm going to turn the table on you because this is actually your question. And
okay.
It's what could you do differently to move your spiritual leadership in the home up a notch or two? What are some things that you would think? How would you answer that question?
Well, I guess first thing I would say is men, I believe, are called to be the spiritual heads of their household. Mm-hmm. And so you first have to embrace or agree with that idea. And again, it gets back to intentionality. Mm-hmm. If you don't think you are, or if you don't want to be the spiritual head of your household, you're probably not going to be very effective at it. And so, I'll start with, again, the simplest example. We say grace every night in our home. Mm-hmm. We say grace at lunch and at dinner, whether it's just my wife and me, my mother, my wife and me. Our blessings of the meal aren't necessarily eloquent. We stop and pause. Our grandkids, when they show up, they all have a grace that they say. My oldest granddaughter gives the Irish blessing. May the rose ride up to meet you. May the wind be at your back. I mean, it doesn't really matter what she says, but that's her blessing. My 4-year-old grandson has the deal, open, shut them, open, shut them. He's opening and closing his hands. He's clapping. And then we say, God is good, God is great. So, again, simple example, but I think it starts at the dinner table. Yeah. And then and then, and I'm not saying I'm an expert at this, but I try to, I'm in the Word in some way, shape, or form every day, either because I'm on small groups, or I'm in a Bible study, or I'm in a class. And so there's not a day that goes by when I'm not in the Word, either being challenged by something, looking into something, or completing an assignment that I've been given. Yeah. And so then I think it's where you spend your time. I mean, we're involved in our church. I'm involved in a couple of faith-based organizations so it's unlikely anybody's people that know me, they're not going to wonder if my faith was important to me. Yeah. I'm not saying I got it all figured out, because I don't, but I'm not bashful about talking about it. I'm not bashful about letting people know where I am. And if there's an opening in the conversation to talk to somebody about their faith, or ask my kids, I have a friend right now that's going through some tough times, and I said to him, where is your faith in all this? Yeah. Because if you're not paying attention to that, it's what did Pascal say? There's a God-shaped hole inside of every man waiting to be filled, but as in our flawed human nature, we are constantly trying to fill it with other things that don't quite fit the right way. And so I just try to be open about it. My kids, grandkids, my wife, my mother, my brother, they're never going to wonder where Leigh was in his faith journey. So I think maybe the answer is try to lead by example.
Yeah. Well, Leigh, you've been leading by example for me, for sure. And thank you for the time that you spent with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. This has been great.
Talking about this. And I appreciate you so much. Thanks for being part of the XM podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I really appreciate Leigh and the time that he spent with me today. I would encourage you to find people that can invest in your life, mentor you, encourage you, and keep you accountable. It is so important. Legacy is how we leave this world and the footprint that we leave behind. What will your tombstone say? Have you thought about it? Well, thank you again for listening. We appreciate every comment and like, and everyone who's sharing these episodes with loved ones. Thank you. Until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless.